Today's subject is a woman whose beauty graced the silver screen, whose strength redefined the image of women in American television, and whose career spanned from dusty westerns to bold crime dramas. Angie Dickinson. She was the sultry voice behind iconic lines and the striking figure who stood shoulder to shoulder with legends like John Wayne and Frank Sinatra, but behind the feathered hair, red carpet smiles, and groundbreaking TV roles. Angie Dickinson's most defining story didn't come from fame, it came from sacrifice. While the world adored her as the trailblazing star of Policewoman and the unforgettable presence in Rio Bravo and Dressed to Kill, Angie was quietly living a life far more dramatic than any script could capture. She became a mother at the height of her career, just as the studio lights burned brightest. But when her daughter Nikki was born prematurely and later diagnosed with autism, Angie didn't retreat. She reoriented her entire life. Offers slowed, roles faded, but her commitment never wavered. She walked away from the spotlight not in defeat, but in devotion. To the public, she was a sex symbol of the 60s and 70s. To her daughter, she was the constant, the one who stayed. It wasn't always enough. The road was painful, the misunderstandings endless, and the heartbreak unspeakable. In 2007, Nikki ended her life after 4 decades of struggle, leaving Angie with a grief few can name and fewer still can carry. This is the story of Angie Dickinson and the daughter she loved fiercely, the fame she gave up, and the quiet strength that endured long after Hollywood moved on. Nikki Bacharach was born on July 12, 1966 in Los Angeles, California. Into what seemed like a dream family by Hollywood standards, her mother, Angie Dickinson, was a rising screen siren, and her father, Burt Bacharach, a musical genius shaping the sound of an era. But that dream cracked the moment Nikki arrived. She was born 3 months premature, weighing just 1 pound and 10 ounces, so small that she was immediately placed into an incubator and kept there for 90 days. In those early months, her parents were not allowed to hold her, touch her, or speak too close, medical protocol at the time. Feared sensory stimulation could overwhelm her fragile system. For Angie, it was a devastating start to motherhood. The most elemental bond with her baby disrupted from the beginning. Nikki survived, miraculously, but the long shadow of that traumatic beginning followed her and her family for the rest of their lives. As she grew, signs of developmental differences became impossible to ignore. She didn't speak until she was almost 3, displayed obsessive attachment to inanimate objects, and was painfully sensitive to sound and light. She collected trash, old batteries, broken sunglasses, pieces of string, and kept them like treasure. Her eyes were misaligned, her vision impaired. Her behavior confused those around her. She wasn't simply different, she was inexplicable. Angie, despite her thriving career in the 1970s, sensed the growing storm. Her daughter didn't fit into any known diagnosis of the time, and expert opinions offered more questions than answers. While Angie filmed Policewoman and stood before millions as the embodiment of strength, at home she was navigating breakdowns, tantrums, silence, and a child whose world she could not reach. In 1969, Burt Bacharach composed an instrumental piece titled Nikki, a tender dedication to his daughter. It was his way of expressing love through the only language he knew, music. But music, no matter how beautiful, could not fix what was unraveling at home. As Nikki aged into adolescence, her emotional storms intensified. At 17, her parents, desperate and unsure, placed her in the Constance Boltman Wilson Foundation in Minnesota, a residential facility promising life skills and stability. It was supposed to be a short stay, maybe a year and a half. She remained there nearly a decade. During that time, she lived under rigid rules, was forced to cut her hair, adhere to disciplined regimens that didn't suit her nature, and live far from family in a setting she would later describe as psychologically scarring Angie. And Burt would come to deeply regret this decision. Burt, decades later, said in anguish, "I wish someone had told me, you're not going to fix her, just love her." While Nikki was away, Angie began to pull back from Hollywood. She rejected major roles, declined television offers, and quietly prioritized her child over a career that still beckoned. She traded red carpets for therapy sessions, casting calls for parent-teacher meetings, stardom for motherhood in the trenches. By the time Nikki returned home in the early 1990s, she was in her mid-20s and mentally bruised. Yet she tried. She enrolled at California Lutheran University, pursuing geology with a seriousness that surprised even her professors. She loved rocks, formations, and natural phenomena, earthquakes, volcanic patterns, glacial shifts, but her poor eyesight, a lifelong complication from prematurity, limited her course load. She could only take one class per semester and could not complete lab-intensive requirements. Despite that, she earned her degree. But dreams of working in the field, of having a career, faded quickly. In 1994, the American Psychiatric Association officially recognized Asperger's syndrome in the DSM. It was a breakthrough in understanding neurodivergence, particularly among those with high intelligence, unusual sensitivity, and difficulty with social interaction. For the first time, the traits Nikki exhibited, her rigid routines, her social awkwardness, her emotional isolation, had a name. Still, no one made the connection in time. It wasn't until the year 2000 that Angie, reading an article in a magazine, stumbled across a description of Asperger's that matched Nikki exactly. It was an awakening drenched in guilt. She had spent over 3 decades trying to change, train, and help her daughter, only to realize she'd been asking her to become someone she was never wired to be. In the early 2000s, Nikki moved between her own modest apartment in Thousand Oaks and Angie's home in Beverly Hills. She traveled when she could, especially to Tahiti, which she adored, visiting over 30 times. She loved cats, meteor showers, and the science of the natural world. She didn't like crowds, small talk, or television. She was brilliant in her passions and guarded in her emotions. She once described her inner world as a machine always on, buzzing with noise she couldn't escape. Though she tried to live independently, she remained deeply reliant on Angie for emotional grounding. Angie, now long past the spotlight, became Nikki's steady companion, supporting, listening, watching for signs of darkness. And the darkness came often. By 2006, Nikki had spoken aloud about death. She questioned why she had to live with such a burden. She felt excluded from the world, unseen by a culture that prized charm and conformity. She struggled with the noise, literal and mental, and feared being institutionalized again. Though she had never attempted suicide before, her expressions became increasingly clear. Angie and Burt both worried, but didn't know what else they could do. Nikki was 40. She had spent her life battling an invisible storm, misunderstood by medicine, misjudged by society, and mourned in advance by parents who had watched her suffer in slow motion for decades. On January 4, 2007, Nikki Bacharach took her life by placing a plastic bag over her head, filling it with helium, and sitting quietly in her apartment in Thousand Oaks. Her note was simple. Her method was planned. Her death was quick. She chose a method that would not leave a mess, would not traumatize the ones who found her. She died the way she lived, quietly, painfully, and alone. The family statement read, "She quietly and peacefully committed suicide to escape the ravages to her brain brought on by Asperger's." Nikki was cremated. No elaborate funeral, no celebrity tribute, no Hollywood eulogy. Her obituary simply listed her passions: science, cats, glacial calving, meteor showers, and Tahiti. For Angie Dickinson, it was the loss that eclipsed all else. She had given up fame to stand beside Nikki, had sacrificed the peak years of her screen career to nurture a child no one could explain, and still she could not save her. In interviews years later, Angie's voice trembled when she spoke of Nikki. There was no bitterness, only sorrow, the kind that never quiets. Burt Bacharach carried the guilt as well. His music became softer in the years after Nikki's death, more introspective. He admitted to breaking down many times, saying Nikki's passing was the one tragedy he could never compose his way out of. For two people who had given the world so much hit songs, iconic performances, moments of cultural immortality, nothing left a greater mark than the child they could never fully reach. Nikki Bacharach's life was not glamorous, not triumphant by Hollywood terms, but it was real. It was filled with daily acts of courage, quiet resistance against a world that never quite understood her. Her story is not one of failure. It is one of pain, resilience, and misunderstood brilliance. And through that pain, her parents learned the true cost of love, not just to give, but to witness suffering with open eyes and still stay Nikki's. Life ended, but her story reshaped theirs forever. It redefined success, fame, parenthood, and purpose. And in that, she left behind a legacy that no award, no song, no film could ever match. One child. No awards, no applause, no standing ovation. Just a life marked by struggle, silence, and a kind of pain no fame could ever protect against. Nikki was never meant for Hollywood, not the cameras, not the pressure, not the noise. She came into the world fighting to breathe, and for 40 years, she kept fighting against the noise in her head, the loneliness in her heart, and the misunderstanding that followed her everywhere. Angie stepped back from stardom to be by her side, trading movie sets for hospital rooms, scripts for specialists. Burt wrote songs for millions, but none that could soothe the sorrow he saw in his daughter's eyes in the end. Nikki didn't leave behind a spotlight. She left behind a silence. A silence so loud it broke the hearts of two parents who would have given everything to keep her. Here, Angie and Burt didn't just lose a daughter. They lost the chance to save her, and that kind of loss doesn't fade with time. It lingers in empty rooms, in quiet birthdays, in the ache of what might be been. If this story moved you, and you want to hear more of the truths fame tries to forget, subscribe to Legacy Uncovered. Your support helps us share what the headlines never will. Thanks for listening.